Give me liberty or give me death. Don't tread on me. They hate us for our freedom. Here in the United States of America, we've had a long and proud relationship with the concept of freedom. We declared independence. We fought tyranny. We abolished slavery. Free speech. Freedom of religion. Free press. Free healthcare. Freedom. Heck yeah. You better not touch our freedoms. But what does freedom mean? And what is liberty? What's the difference? And sovereignty? Freedom, liberty, and sovereignty. These three words describe very similar things, but people often use them interchangeably, or they mean different things to different people. So let's bring some clarity to the discussion and try to lay out some important distinctions between these three concepts. If you're new to the channel, this is In Truth Victorious, and I make videos to help clarify the core values of Western civilization so that those of us who care enough to defend and preserve these values will know what the heck we're even fighting for. My videos are based on the science of propertarianism, which by the end of this video we'll be calling sovereigntarianism. That's a mouthful. But if those words don't make any sense to you right now, don't worry about it. Just stay tuned because we're going to take a closer look. Freedom! What do we mean when we say freedom? Well, freedom is this. This right here is believed to be the first written reference to the concept of freedom. It's called the Amagi symbol, which I might not be pronouncing right because, well, it's Sumerian, and this was more than 4,000 years ago. The word meant to be relieved of one's debt or obligation, and the literal translation was returning to the mother. This translation suggests a restoration of one's original property and status. Freedom was granted at the completion of obligations or release from bondage. Essentially, freedom as contrasted to obligation or slavery. And ever since that original word back in Mesopotamia, freedom has continued to be contrasted with its opposite, slavery. Freedom meant a release from bondage, or having paid one's debt of servitude to the ruler. In Europe, the word freedom continued to mean either one was no longer a slave, or one was never a slave at all. So yes, we love freedom in America. And yes, we celebrate the triumph of abolishing slavery. But does this really represent our national story? Are we all just a group of slaves who completed our debt of servitude? Were we just granted freedom by some generous and kind ruler? Liberty. While the word liberty is almost identical in meaning to the word freedom, we can point out some important differences. The history of the word liberty starts in the 14th century with a meaning of being granted privileges. In the 15th century, it referred to private land in which special privileges were granted. This led to the 18th century, where liberty meant a small district within a larger jurisdiction which was granted special privileges. Liberty essentially came to take on a meaning of being granted privileges within a specific territory. This was permission for a smaller community to retain its local laws and customs within a larger nation. So while freedom was associated with the individual and associated with slavery, liberty was associated with the larger group and privileges granted within that territory. But the important point is that both freedom and liberty were granted by a more powerful authority. Freedom and liberty were given by permission. So again, does liberty really describe our national story? Was the US granted privilege to exist by our dominant European masters? And if both liberty and freedom were granted by an authority, then who's that authority now? And where does the power to grant freedom even come from? Sovereignty. The king, as the archetype of sovereignty, has sole power to rule over his territory. The word sovereignty describes a monopoly of violence within a given domain. Sovereignty is the power to deny all other alternatives. So it is like a freedom or liberty, but not granted by others, instead defended by force. Individual sovereignty means that every man has the power to rule over his own life, his property, and his family's affairs. Every man a king, a sheriff, a judge, and a warrior. And sovereignty exists by reciprocal insurance, which means that a group of men get together and agree to defend each other's sovereignty. That means there is no authority granting permission. Rather, it is created by men with agency who work together to suppress all violations of sovereignty. And either a group is successful at establishing sovereignty, or it is not. Freedom and liberty by permission. Sovereignty created in fact. Looking at the history of the United States, a useful comparison might be to contrast the Emancipation Proclamation and the Declaration of Independence. While emancipating slaves may be noble or virtuous, it is markedly different from declaring independence. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free. Lincoln makes no mistake that freedom is being given. In defense of our persons and properties under actual violation, we took up arms. Jefferson, in contrast, makes it very clear that independence could only be secured through violence. While freedom and liberty may be wished for, hoped for, dreamed of, or even protested about, sovereignty is a demonstration of ability, and it is demonstrated by the application of force. One begs for liberty by permission. One forces sovereignty at the point of a spear, tip of an arrow, blade of a sword, and barrel of a gun. That's the difference between failed beggars for liberty and successful warriors for sovereignty. Quick disclaimer, I am not advocating that you go grab a gun and start acting out violence right now. Hopefully you know better than that. I'm describing how civilizations are built, and if you deny the fact that they're built on violence, then I'm afraid you're just living in some kind of dream world. Now we've got another saying in the United States, and that goes like this: freedom isn't free. This little paradox is meant to highlight the cost of maintaining freedom. The utopian idea of freedom is that I should just be free to do whatever I want, and I shouldn't have to pay any cost for it. This is a childish dream. Total and absolute freedom. And unless maybe you're planning to wander out into the wilderness where no one will ever even find you, then absolute freedom will remain just a dream. Freedom has limits and comes at a cost. Sovereignty has a cost. The cost of sovereignty is that every man must fight. Every man must fulfill his duty. Every man must ensure the sovereignty of others reciprocally. And one must accept this limit of reciprocity as the cost one pays to have their sovereignty ensured by others. These three concepts of freedom, liberty, and sovereignty can also roughly be translated into three different classes within society. Sovereignty is the realm of the aristocracy, the kings, the nobles. It represents the balance of power between those with the capacity to rule. Sovereignty is also representative of the dominant male, the established male, with conservative values and a desire to preserve order and extend it into future generations. Liberty would be associated more with the merchant or managerial class, the middle class. Liberty is also associated with the ascendant male, who's not so much concerned with conserving wealth as he's concerned with opportunities to make more of it. And freedom is associated with the working class or laborer. The free man or craftsman still spends most of his time laboring like a slave, but with the freedom to make his own decisions. That rally cry of freedom has been an effective way for politicians to appeal to the working class. People who mostly just want to be left alone so they can go about their work. Now, none of this is meant to be a judgment about the relative merit of each of these three classes. And I'm not saying that liberty and freedom aren't valuable in their own way. That's why I've asked the question in the title of this video, which do you want? And maybe you want all three. But you must at least recognize that it all starts with sovereignty. Without sovereignty, freedom and liberty can't even be granted. Liberty and freedom result from sovereignty. And if someone wants freedom or liberty without accounting for the costs of sovereignty, they are just free riding. Free riding on the violence of others. Liberty and freedom must be created top down from the initial establishment of order and rule. And order and rule can only be established by one means: the organized application of violence. Freedom is not free, and everyone must pay a cost. This is something that libertarians often ignore. A libertarian utopia exists only in the imagination, because it's something that could only exist by permission. That's why we don't see any fully libertarian nations. Sovereignty, on the other hand, fully accounts for the cost of establishing order through violence. Those who don't account for these costs are either ignorant or they're trying to get a free ride. So libertarianism fails, and sovereigntarianism wins. Yes, sovereigntarianism. It might not be a word you've heard before, but it is a great way to describe a culture which puts sovereignty first and has liberty and freedom as byproducts. Freedom can be given by those capable of denying you of it. Liberty can be given for a small group or community to practice their own traditions. Sovereignty either exists in fact or it does not. Next time you hear the rally cry of freedom, consider chanting instead, sovereignty, sovereignty, sovereignty. Or better yet, cultivate your own agency, be a man of action, and own your destiny. If you find this information useful, check out my other videos. Hit like and subscribe. And for more information on sovereignty and sovereigntarianism, go to propertarianism.com and learn more.